Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Brand new section for the podcast, focusing on boxing, which I've always had a love for. I remember watching old fights, and I've been watching it ever since. I've never stopped. Some people kind of jump to MMA or they just quit watching it altogether, but I can't seem to stop watching it. There's something about the sweet science that appeals to me. So I do discuss it in different areas, and unfortunately, there's different opinions about what the fight game should be, and so it's hard to have the conversation, but I do want to at least leave opinions about what I've seen. So I'm going to now share with this section of the podcast different updates of different fights and things I've seen that I think are worth discussing, because not everything is worth it. Some fights are just terrible. FuryWilder 3 happened just last night, and let me just tell you, I'm not advocating. See, in the era of Don King, right, you had a solid undercard, and then you had the co-main, and then you had the main. And anybody who understands the sports aspect of booking, you know how undercard supports the main and the co-main. The goal should be to get you hyped and get you into the main and the co-main, because you're seeing that these undercard guys or gals are up and coming. They're fighting hard to try to prove to you, the fan, that they're worth watching in the future. Then by the time you get to co-main main, you should be on the edge of your seat, ready to see these guys just tear each other's head off. In the Don King era, this was happening pretty much every single event. He was booking quality co-mains, quality mains, and a solid undercard. So it was always a solid key event where you didn't have kind of these dull, boring fights that you might see recently. So we've lost a lot of that. Most of the fighters now have a greater sense of self-preservation. That's not a bad thing, but when you're a fight fan, it's kind of frustrating, because you see in the MMA world that happens rarely, that you have guys that just kind of stare at each other. But in the boxing era, it happens a lot. And I argue, and I just literally argued somebody, that self-respect is important, self-preservation is critical, but what really causes some of these types of staring matches is the mutual respect and the sportsmanship, because you're dealing with two people in the fight. Let's say they're making $1 million each. You're dealing with millionaires, and they're saying, well, I'm going to get paid regardless. I just have to, touch them a little bit, and then, fight goes to a decision, whatever happens. It's not the same as when you're hungry and you're low and your biggest payday is $100,000 and you're trying to get to a title because you know that makes you more money. Then you're going to kind of throw for the fences. You're talking guys like Edwin Valero, guys like Prime Arturo Gatti, guys like Marcos Maidana. And then in the yesteryears, even the guys, and I argue steroids had a piece to play, but even the guys that paydays weren't as high, but even the guys that were at the top of the card that were always featured, your Julian Jacksons, your Mike McCallums, your Gerald McClellans, Michael Watsons, even the guys that were featured kind of as co-main talent, or they were dance partner with somebody who's main, like a Chris Eubank or Roy Jones or Antonio Tarver, James Toney in his prime, they still were willing to go out there and make a show of it, because that was their persona. Again, I do think steroids had a little bit to play in some of why people were willing to take risks. Regardless, we've seen kind of a decline in the action aspect of fighting. That's okay if you're the kind of fighter where you stylistically have been that way because of, let's say, damage to your hand or something. But if you're doing it just because you know that you're going to get paid $1 million, it's not enticing or appealing to anybody. We know that. So when FuryWilder 3 comes along, and honestly, all 3 fights in the trilogy were exciting. These 3 just seem to have a chemistry in the ring going back and forth. The outcomes were obviously not that appealing, because in the first fight, it goes to a draw. Nobody accepts that it should have been a draw. Whether you felt that Wilder won or Fury won, the point is nobody saw a draw that was really paying attention. In the second fight, Wilder gets absolutely wrecked, but then all these stories come out about gloves, and you can see that there's something weird going on with the gloves, floppy gloves, and then dirty fighting, and whole nine. Regardless, Wilder gets wrecked in the second fight, and it's obvious that there's no dispute that Fury has now dethroned the undisputed WBC champion. And Fury, of course, is the lineal champion, which means he's the man in the division, has been. What people missed about the third fight, though, is that both guys, first of all, they can't stand the sight of each other. There's a respect for the talent of each side, arguably. Wilder has repeatedly said he thinks Fury is a highly skilled fighter. Fury has repeatedly said he thinks Wilder beats everybody but him. And he's called Wilder number 2 in the division. He thinks Wilder knocks everybody else out. He thinks that there's a mutual admiration for the skills, but the guys can't stand each other. This is important. It's critically important because we infrequently have seen this where you've got guys and there's true animosity going into the ring. But when you had the animosity in the yesteryears, think of a fight like Tyson versus Mitch Blood Green. There was true beef there. There was animosity there. And as a result, it was actually a very entertaining fight, even though Mitch had no real chance and he was blown out on the cards, but he lasted the distance against a guy who's a knockout artist. It created the story of the fight and it got you in it. It got you to where you wanted to go through this. Tyson Holyfield, same thing. Lewis McCall, Lewis Rahman, Eubank and Ben, and so on. You create these feuds and you create a story and a narrative, and then you market and advertise that narrative that, hey, this is just bad blood. These people don't like each other, at least right now. Once you guys retire from the business, you can shake hands and apologize all you care to, but for right now, this is what it is. Riddick Bowe was probably one of the best at it. Andrew Galata was one of the best at it. I could go on and on. Ultimately, Fury Wilder 3 was in the similar vein of guys that just don't like each other. They can't stand the sight of each other. And so we knew that we were going to be in for something special. We just didn't realize how it would go. But what people missed is that both guys also had something to prove. Tyson Fury is the lineal champion, has been the lineal champion since he beat Klitschko, which was a very long time ago. And as lineal champion, that means you're the man in the division. That's essentially what it means. When Fury beat Klitschko, it was a shocker. Nobody expected him to beat Klitschko, and they certainly didn't expect Fury to beat Klitschko the way that he beat Klitschko, which was pretty much decisive. It was not up for question because Vladimir Klitschko, as I call him, Grabomir Klitschko, had been the dominant factor in heavyweight for many years. And so this was a shocking outcome for Tyson Fury, who you look at this guy and he's obese and he doesn't really hardly work out that much. And yet he goes in there and he puts on pretty much a masterclass of boxing against the guy in the division and becomes the man. But Tyson Fury had never defended a title. So despite having held various titles at heavyweight, he had never defended a title. He was supposed to defend his titles in a rematch against Klitschko, but it never happened because Fury had his mental illness situation and his drug situation. He was on the couch. He was getting fat. He was depressed. He was suicidal. All of this. So he never got a chance to defend the titles that he won against anybody. He just left the business. He still kept lineal because nobody beat him. But as far as the actual belts, he had never defended a title in the ring, and that was a criticism on him. Because when he was supposed to fight David Haye, that didn't happen. He's supposed to fight Klitschko, that didn't happen. There was talk about other fights that never happened. He never had defended a title, and that's unthinkable now, that a heavyweight champion had never defended a title, but he was the only person who had never defended a title, despite we see that he's clearly talented. Now, after he had fought with Fury, or fought with Wilder rather, then it's like, okay, after the second fight, then what happens is we're supposed to see a rematch, a third fight. Wilder invoked the rematch clause for a third fight, the rubber match. At this point, Fury still hadn't defended the title. He's supposed to go fight Anthony Joshua. He's working to try to get the Joshua fight because he knows, first, it's unification. But second, he knows that he has a really good chance of beating Anthony Joshua because Andy Ruiz had just wrecked Anthony Joshua just prior. So Fury's going in thinking this is an easy unification. I'm the top guy in the division. And I could probably retire because at that point I've done everything I need to do. Wilder gets involved. The arbitration gets involved. He signed a contract to agrees to fight Wilder. And the only reason it didn't happen before is because of the pandemic and the shutdowns where they can't sell a venue because we were closed at the time. So FuryWilder 3, now Fury has no choice but to defend his title for the first time against the guy he took it from. And usually when there's a rematch like that, if you think about Louis Rahman, right? Usually when that happens, the person who lost the title is hungrier to get it back. That was something to consider. With Wilder, it was such a dominant loss in the second fight that nobody really knew what's the mind frame of this guy. Is he going to come in here and is he going to be dominant like he used to be? Or is he going to wreck himself and just fall short? Is Fury going to knock him out again? Nobody knew what version of Wilder was going to show up. We saw the training. We saw him change, that he's now with Malik Scott. The bad part about that is that Malik Scott was a fighter that Wilder knocked out in what appeared to be a dive. We can't prove it, but it appeared to be. And so now we're questioning, okay, which version of Wilder shows up? Is this going to be the same kind of outcome as the second fight? Or will Wilder be changed enough that he can beat Fury, even if it's a questionable or sketchy win, which would then set up what? A fourth fight, just like Pacquiao Marquez. So Wilder had something to prove because we don't know what his frame of mind is. We don't know, is he improved? And we don't know mentally how he's doing. And then Fury had never defended the title in the ring up to this point, so the pressure's on him. And Fury really wanted that fight with Joshua, and that may have messed with him mentally. He had issues with his daughter's birth. He had issues with training. He had issues. He caught COVID. He had a lot of things happening. So now it creates this story and drama, whether manufactured, some of it was legit, but it creates a story and a drama around the third fight that was palatable. You could feel it. And that's the spirit of what boxing used to be before we got to the super high paydays. And these guys made a lot of money, but they earned it. Both of them earned it that night. Because I'm going to tell you something. If you get a chance to watch Fury Wilder trilogy, I say watch all three. But certainly third. Now I'm going to tell you, the undercard was kind of garbage except for a couple of fights. The co-main was certainly garbage. This was the only real fight, other than one other fight I can think of, that was worth the cost of admission. So if you get to watch just this one fight, I would fast forward to just this one fight, frankly. But I think it's worth watching the trilogy, and it's certainly worth watching this fight because it was a throwback to the way fights used to be. It was a throwback to the energy and the emotions that used to be there. If you're a wrestling fan, Big E did the announcements for both guys, which got you hyped, right? It got you into the thing because he's a good orator. But this was a throwback fight, and it felt different than any other fight that has been, and just in general the trilogy, but different than the dance between two guys or two girls than what's happened historically, because it's the kind of fight I like, which is I don't necessarily like an even fight. I like a fight where it appears to be kind of a toss-up because of all these uncertainties and all this hype and all this energy. But eventually one guy is going to prove that he's better than the other guy. And he leaves no doubt in my mind that he is, even though going in it appeared to be kind of a toss-up. That's the kind of fight I like. I don't like the fights where it's a clear 50-50. Each round is, I'm not sure to give it to. I can't stand those fights, and they happen too often in boxing. This was not that. What happened was Wilder came out and he attacked the body straight away. Attacking the body against a larger guy and a faster guy is actually a smart strategy. So clearly Malik Scott had taught him, we need to break him down to the body. Well, let me educate you a little. Why do you do that? You do that because it slows down a fast fighter, but it also forces you to drop your hands. Emmanuel Stewart used to talk about it. Your instinct is to drop your hands, first because you're guarding the body, second because you're kind of wearing down a little bit, but more to block what's coming to the body. What should happen after that is that you should then be able to come over the top and nail a shot. Wilder's signature shot is a right hand over the top, but he has power in both hands. However, we've seen in fights recently, his power appears to wane as the fight goes on because likely he has muscular mass and it's weighing him down. And Antonio Tarver called it out that he seems to have gained possibly too much muscle that's slowing him down. Wilder's best target weight's around 220. He came into the fight around 237. You think it's a small difference, but his arms were massive. I was shocked at seeing this guy's arms. And he was doing the weight lifts and everything else. Wilder gets criticism for his legs, but some people are just like that, especially when you're tall. It's not easy to get that kind of mass on the lower legs as you might think. And I don't think it plays a factor because of balance, but in this situation, his strategy was sound. He didn't implement it as quickly as he needed to, because in order to do that, he would have to have executed the final part of the plan pretty much right away when he started seeing the hands drop, and he didn't do it. So roughly rounds 1 and 2, to me, I saw Wilder win them just because Fury could not get in and land anything. It wasn't necessarily that Wilder was significantly impressive. He was doing enough to nullify and reset Fury for 2 rounds. Great. In the second, Fury adjusted. That was when Wilder needed to land the bomb over the top, and he didn't do it for whatever reason. So then in round 3, Fury drops Wilder. Now, people expected Wilder to get dropped just because he came in as a super heavyweight. He came in 270 something pounds. So he was massive, and just that weight and his size, and he doesn't really have power, but Wilder doesn't take a shot well. So then he takes this and then he goes down. And you could tell he's a little bit disoriented. He gets essentially saved by the bell. And anybody who still watches boxing remembers Victor Ortiz versus Andre Berto, where it's this back and forth knockdown. That's what happened here, because in round 4, Wilder dropped Tyson Fury off a right hand, and it happened twice, 2 knockdowns. So it's 10-7 round. And it was right at the end of the round. That was frustrating because the shot he threw is the shot he should have thrown when Fury reset in round 2, and we would have had a 2-time champion in Deontay Wilder and a new lineal champion. He waited too long to nail that shot. That was the signature shot, because when Fury had dropped him, Wilder didn't have anything left. It was basically a Hail Mary shot that he landed in the 4th that just happened to be flush enough and strong enough to throw Fury off. Because it happened at the end of the round, Wilder couldn't capitalize on it to get him out of there or force a ref stoppage. Now, talking about the ref, it was Russell Mora. Anybody who watches boxing may remember Russell Mora refed Mares Ekbiko, and Russell Mora basically allowed Abner Mares to get away with criminal murder with all the clinching and the dirty fighting. That's what happened here. Mora would not stop clinches. He would not stop headlocks. He wouldn't get involved when Fury was getting overly dirty and leaning on Wilder. All this leaning wears your body down when it's a bigger guy. So now Wilder's getting tired. So from round 5 all the way, I'd say, to round 10, Wilder is basically running on, as the song says, running on empty. He's just there, and he's staggered every time he hits a shot. And he made a critical mistake starting in 5, which is he started going backwards instead of going sideways. Fury is very good at closing distance with the jab. He'll come in with the jab, and then he'll either land another shot or he'll clinch you and lean on you to wear you down, and then he's beating you in the clinch, and it wears you down. It tires you. But Wilder kept going backwards, and Fury kept doing the jab, come in, and it was the same sequence over and over, to the point that Wilder had to basically eat the shot he knew was coming and then either trigger a clinch or duck into a clinch, knowing a clinch was coming. It was the same mistake that Povetkin, again, if you watch boxing, Povetkin made against Grabomir Klitschko, which was always kind of leaning in and allowing the bigger guy to lean on top of you. It's a bad strategy, but it's kind of, when you're discombobulated that way, it's kind of instinctive. So for multiple rounds, this happens, and then in round 10, Fury finally drops Wilder. And again, Wilder's still trying to stay on his feet after this, and then round 11, basically the ref has to stop it. Wilder fell face forward, and at that point, the ref had to make a decision. And I want to say, regardless of the outcome and regardless of what you think about either fighter, if you are a boxing fan, the truth is both these guys are warriors. I say they're the top in the heavyweight division. They gave us a throwback trilogy that we haven't seen in a long time. A long time. It's the kind of fight that you want to see in every single, situation, and you just don't anymore. And I give hats off to both guys. I think Wilder was improved, and I think he works hard, and I think he beats anybody else, just not Tyson Fury. And I think Fury is on the decline, but again, he's a warrior, has heart. if you get a chance to watch the fight, I highly recommend it. I think it was a solid fight. Just the fight, I would ignore the undercard, but it was memories.